We today are talking about chapter succession planning and volunteer management. We are recording the session and it will be made available to those unable to attend, or if you'd like to go back and watch afterwards. The reason we selected this topic and wanted to be sure to share this with executive directors as well as presidents is it's been a very common topic for the chapter relations team when we're talking with chapter leaders. Cal Lockett, who is the executive director of Coachella Valley chapter, and Cheryl Murphy from the Illinois chapter, who is the CED there, have both set up programs in their chapters to address volunteer management and look to succession planning to make sure they have the right people in the right positions at the right time. So I'm going to turn it over to Cal and Cheryl, and then at the end, we'll leave a little bit of time for other people to share and ask questions at the end. So Cal, Cheryl, over to you.
All right, thanks, Crystal. I'm going to start with some discussion on volunteer management and some of the things that we've put in place in the Illinois chapter, and then Cal's going to piggyback off of that on what they're doing in their chapter, and then we will both circle back around and talk a little bit about the succession planning. So for us, a few years ago, we established a volunteer commission. And so the goal of the volunteer commission initially was just volunteer placement and to try to centralize that and make it a little bit more of a strategic process. It's made up of former and current board members and also presidents. So these people know the chapter very well. They've been through probably many committees. They've chaired committees. They've been on the board. A couple of them have been presidents or even a current president. And so that's how it started. But then it grew into creating a volunteer orientation. They do committee chair onboarding and training now, and then they do some circle back to get some feedback and satisfaction results from the chairs and the volunteers. So what started out as just sort of a little bit of an onboarding thing has really turned into a full circle 360 volunteer management program that's been very successful for us. So I'll start with the volunteer orientation. It starts with a volunteer application, which may sound really simple, but I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you guys see that? And the reason I'm sharing this is just that we changed this when we started the volunteer commission. Yes, we had an application in the past and it was basic information, but when we decided that we needed to be more strategic about placements and not just put people on the committee where their friend was, we started asking some different questions. So obviously contact information, but then we're asking them about their interests and talents. And this helps us understand potential committee placement. And you may have, like, one of my favorite stories is we have a banker who's on the magazine committee, and that's, you know, one of our more creative committees. And he said, like, it is just his favorite place to be because it gets him out of his banking world. Well, I never would have maybe identified him as someone for the magazine committee, but based on these questions and the conversations we have, we learn more about people than what we might have otherwise identified based on their CAI working world. And then I think this is the most probably important section, is the working style. Are you an idea person? Are you an organizer? Are you task oriented? And this helps us understand, you know, you have committees that you need doers, right? You might have a committee and everyone has a million ideas and no one will do anything with them. Or you may have a committee that, you know, you've got a chair, like you're going to need a chair in a couple of years and you have no one on that committee who is a potential future leader. And so these questions help us identify people and start placing people on committees looking toward the future. And then we also ask them what their availability is. So, you know, we don't want to place someone on a committee who only has 2 hours a month and this committee is working 10 hours a month. So that helps with that. And so then what we do a volunteer orientation, we make them do that application because it starts with commitment. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, you know, what your experience is, but in the past, we'd run into someone at the trade show, for example. Oh yeah, put me on the social committee. And then you put them on the social committee and then they never show up, or like there was no real commitment to start. So that application, they have to do that to start the process. The other part now is they have to attend a volunteer orientation. And that also solidifies some of that commitment. Because if they won't fill out the application and they won't attend an orientation, are they really going to attend and participate in the committee work? Probably not. So we hold the volunteer orientation twice a year. And if you can't make it, sorry, you got to wait till the next one. So we are making people prioritize their volunteerism, and that has helped tremendously for us. So our orientation goes through, and we do, chapter background, national background, how the chapter and national fit together. We go through chapter expectations. So what do we expect from you as a volunteer? We also go through what should you expect as a volunteer? Like, so you came here for a reason. What can you expect to get out of your volunteerism? And so that's about a maybe 15, 20-minute presentation. And then I think another important part that we do now is we do an interview. So we break people up into small groups, maybe 2 or 3 people, and then they have a discussion with someone from the volunteer commission. And we just talk about what are they looking for? What is their talent? It's really interesting because we learn things. We found out that this painter is actually a DJ on the side. And this woman who's in sales actually ran an event business before, so like there are some talents that you just don't know until you talk to them. And so we do not allow the volunteers to say, put me on the social committee, put me on the golf committee. They may end up there, but we always say, we're going to interview you and we are going to match you with your talents and your availability with the needs of our committees. And it may or may not be what you think it's going to be to start. So we do that process, and then we tell them, this is the committee you're on, and then we get them going. The second thing that we changed for our volunteers is formerly, like they used to, okay, you're on the social committee, and then they just start going. And it may take them a few months to figure out what they can do, how they can engage, how they can be helpful. So with their placement email assignment, they get a committee overview. So we rewrote descriptions for every committee. So these are all on our website, but this is an example of our finance committee description. So it tells the committee purpose, it tells a list of activities that the committee performs. It has a listing of the committee is recommended for members who, so it's kind of like the type of person that we're looking for on this committee. It lists the time commitments and responsibilities. Sorry, my screen's kind of scrolling a little too fast here. So we don't want someone to join a committee that meets monthly and they really just wanted a, remote quarterly type committee, or they want to do most of their work outside of committee meetings. So we list all of those requirements out, and they get that with their assignment. So if that's not going to be a good assignment for them, I hope we did our work up front to make sure that match is good. But in case we didn't, they have that right there so that they can sort of stop that and say, hey, wait a second, I don't know if that's for me. But we give them the strategic plan for the committee. We give them the budget for the committee. We give them a committee history, kind of where they are today, list of minutes for the past few months, and then a list of who the committee chair is, the list of the rest of the volunteers, who their board liaison and who their staff liaison is, and what those roles all are. And by giving them that information up front, that's helped people get excited and become engaged right away. Then after the first step with the volunteers, and that part was better managed, we then focused on the leadership side and the committee chairs. And so some committees were great at passing the torch. This sounds like I'm getting into succession, but it's actually not. And others weren't. Like they just, it was like, hey, you're my friend, come on over, be the next trainer. Or they weren't leading the group very well. And so the volunteer commission created some committee chair training and they do consistent calls to them for feedback to make sure that their committees are running smoothly and properly. we also at this time made sure that the volunteer placements and the volunteer satisfaction was good. So the volunteer commission does circle back interviews with the volunteers to make sure that their placement is working. You know, are they working well with the chairs? Do they feel successful? Are they getting out of their volunteerism what they expected when they signed up? And the commission also works on volunteer appreciation with like notes and gifts and a little potluck lunch for open house pre-COVID. And we do a volunteer spotlight every quarter in our magazine. So every member category, a member or a volunteer within that category is spotlighted on what they do and like a little get to know you. So really the volunteer commission just sort of takes a whole overall umbrella look at all the volunteerism from the moment someone expresses an interest all the way through to a point where you become a chair, and to the point where you're a chair now turning that reign over to the next person. And we've developed pieces and plans and support throughout every step of that process. Cal.
Thanks, Cheryl. So, our system is a little different than the way the Illinois system is set up. When I got here 7 years ago, as Crystal will testify to you, we had a lot of cronyism in our chapter. People were disgruntled and lots of infighting on the board and at the committee level. So we were heavily motivated to put something in place to prevent that from ever happening again. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit. But when we talk about the committees, the thing that makes it work for most people is the success of the committees. So we have 15 committees and 16 committees, including a board level committee. And then between 150 and 170 volunteers that run everything here in the chapter. And we've won 26 chapter achievement awards in the last 7 years. And that's sort of, for our chapter, that's one of the goals. It's one of the rewards that the committees get for working hard on their projects. But the most important thing we have to start with is, how do we get all the committees working together with the board to actually achieve things that help elevate the industry and help solve real problems that our different membership classes have. So we start with setting goals. So about 5 years ago, we set up a strategic planning program. We brought in Paul Gertzit from Washington to lead it. And if you can bring in a professional to do strategic planning, it really helps. We included all of our leadership teams. So we had the board and all of the chairs and co-chairs were involved, and they came up with 5 major long-term goals that we continue to hand down to all the committees. And I'm not going to go through those right now because they're on our website. I'm going to show you how to access that if you're interested. And then we take those goals and we make them into shorter term goals for the chapter and the committees. And from that, we try to anticipate what's going to happen within the industry that's going to drive the problems that we're facing, that the committees are going to try to deal with. And of course, right now in California, we have increased legislation and regulation and all kinds of things coming out of the woodwork that make our lives miserable. So we're dealing with all of that. But then in addition to that, we took a look at each of the membership classes. For managers, we outlined the industry challenges for them. We looked at association board members, and we looked at business partners. Then from that, we start meeting with the committees individually, and we start setting committee goals. And then the board came up with a number of other things that they wanted to do for the committees. And that is, the first thing is to get 11 members on every committee and to recruit new members and try to have all the membership classes represented on every committee, homeowner leaders, managers, and business partners, even on committees that are manager specific. And that has been wildly successful. Our committees are open. You do not get voted in. You just sign up, you fill out the volunteer form, you're on the committee. We don't turn anybody away, and everybody's invited. If you're a member in good standing, you can serve on any committee. So we really encourage that openness, and it turns out it's worked out really well for us. So the next part is trying to make sure that you find the right people to serve on the committees, and that requires identifying what are the types of people that you're looking for. So as you saw on Cheryl's committee volunteer form, that they were asking questions that get at that very issue. Our board came up with 5, and I apologize, I keep looking to the right, but my screen share is on the right-hand side. So selfless service, enthusiastic service, service with integrity, innovative service, and open-minded service, which when you talk about open-mindedness, it means not being closed off to others. And these, as you can see, are all kind of geared at getting rid of the cronyism that was existing there before. And then we, with our outside consultant, we did some research on what is it that causes groups to be successful when they're working on projects. And number one is to make sure that you have a mixture of personalities and temperament types on every committee. That's really important. And what we were finding is that with the committee structure that we had in place at the beginning was that you had a very strong personality, which is typical as chair of the committee, and then they would only let people like them who saw the world from their perspective on that committee. And that causes all kinds of power problems and other issues you've all faced before. Then we also showed them how groups accomplish more with leadership. And so we spent a lot of time with leadership. In fact, we won an award for our leadership program last year. And setting clear goals and objectives. And I'll show you, we have charters for each of the committees that keeps it clear, but then we have the goals from the board of directors that you saw, and then also the goals that the committees come up with themselves. Delegation is critically important, and so we changed the way we no longer take minutes, but instead we just track action items, and every action item has a person's name next to it of who's delegated to be responsible for that action item, and that goes on the agenda as well, just to remind people who's doing what, and then follow through and keeping people accountable is also very important. So finding the right people is always a challenge, and helping people to understand how do you mix it up with different communication styles, temperaments, and that sort of thing. And of course, most of you have seen this where we break down people into the analyzer, controller, persuader, and stabilizer. That's one program. It's very simple. It's easy to do in a group. So like if we were meeting live, we would take our leaders or a committee, we put them in a room, and we'd put these signs up in the corner of the room and have people go to the corner that best fits their behavioral style. And it's really interesting how it splits out almost evenly into the 4 corners. And people start to realize, hey, there's people that look at the world differently than I look at the world. And that might be good. There's also the Myers-Briggs temperament program that is probably the most used temperament test in the world right now. It's highly effective, it's enjoyable, it's really fun, and it really gets at the whole issue of the need for having different temperaments as part of a group in order to come up with a successful program. So there's a video, and I think Kelly's going to put it in the chat for you. I'm not going to show it right now because it's a little long, but you can take a look at it at your leisure. And again, my slides are going to be on the website, so you can take a look. Here's the website. And if you haven't done this yourselves, it's really important that you understand what your style is. But the best part about this program is people start to become proud of who they are and how they view the world. And you see people who are typically introverts who don't speak up at committee meetings starting to say, hey, you know, my opinion and my viewpoint on this actually works. So then once you get the right people on the committees, there's a number of different ways that you can structure them, but there are 2 more. We have a chair, a co-chair, and a board liaison on every committee. The board liaisons, the job of the board liaison, and this is a board member, is to make sure that the committee never has to slow down waiting for board approval. So the board liaison has permission from the board to make board level decisions to their up to their discretion, but then the board will ratify it at the board meeting following that decision. And then the board, their other job is to keep the board updated on every committee. So we go through every committee, and each board liaison then reports on their committee at every board meeting, so we always know what's going on. And the other thing that the board liaison is responsible for is the finances of that committee. So we split up the chapter finances into all the event committees and the other committees who have budgets, and those committees are responsible, with the board liaison being sort of ultimately in charge of their own budgets. So we have lots of eyes looking at the chapter finances all the time. And then we have some tips, but we really try to hold the leadership to it, is to keep the committee meetings to 1 hour. And I mentioned already that we ask them not to take minutes, but to take to track action items instead. They appoint a whip. So the secretary, or the whip, we call it the whip because I used to be a lobbyist and legislators use the whip. The whip's job is to make sure things get done. So the whip would be taking notes and reminding people of what they're supposed to do, making sure people get invitations to the committee meetings, and keeping tabs on who's showing up for the committee meetings and who's doing what, so that at the end of the year we have a record of that and we can help determine who gets awards and who should be recognized. The whip is also responsible for making sure that every person, the leadership team, everybody's responsible to make sure that everybody gives input at every meeting. And we tell people at the committee meetings, at every meeting, we're expecting you to speak up, and if you don't, we're going to call on you to give your input. So there's I mentioned cronyism before. There's a really great kit that you can get called the meeting kit, and it has a bunch of squishy toys that you can give people. You put it in the middle of the table, the toys, and the leadership team is responsible for this at first, but pretty soon you'll start to see all the committee members participating. This is if you have committees that have a hard time communicating or getting anything done because they're fighting inside. So you have a brain, and the brain, you toss that to somebody when they have a great idea. You have the heart, which you give to people when they say something kind about somebody else doing something well. You have a fish called the nega fish, and it's just hilarious to watch some of these old timers who've been around forever. When they want to say, I have something negative to say, they pick up the fish right away before they start talking, and they say, I have something negative to say. Pretty soon they start realizing that they don't need to say it negative, and it starts to correct their behavior. Then there's the cow, which is, we call it the sacred cow. It's for the people who say we've always done it one way and we can't change that. And then there's a cheese for the people who just like to whine. They get the cheese. By doing something humorous like this at the committee meetings, it gets people to start paying attention to their style and how they put others down instead of nurturing other people's opinions. So that's been very helpful for us. And then we ask people to, maintain their meeting dates and to send out reminders. We give them, kind of a sample of all the reminders. I'm going to get a little bit into the logistics, but all of this is on our website, and you're welcome to log on and grab any of this you'd like. This is a sample of our how we track participation, where we have the agenda items here and then who's delegated to follow up on those items. Then this becomes the agenda, and on the agenda we keep the record of who's attending the committee meeting, and that way at the end of the year the leadership team it's real easy for people to figure out who's done what for the committees. And then we go through a lot of training. I'm just going to skip through these. All the committees, event committees, have a copy of our marketing plan, so they can see all of their sponsorships and what's available, the cost, and all the things that come with each sponsorship. So they have that in their binder. And we have a way of modifying sponsorships. We have a policy for that, so they're all aware of that. And then I mentioned that the committee is also responsible for all their financing. So this is a copy of a budget sheet that each committee member would have, and this would be updated every month for their committee meetings. And you can see it has all the sponsorships listed, who the sponsors who have signed up so far are, and then their budget at the bottom. So it makes it real easy for them to track that. Then we have an event information form. So if it's an event, so if you're a lead and you're putting together any kind of a education event or something like that, we have a form to fill out so that you don't skip, people, because there's no time to train everybody, and we want everybody on the committee to have jobs. So if they follow these forms, they don't really need a lot of training. They just fill it out, and then we have all the information we need to carry on. And then we train people in PR and communications. These are the timelines. If they want to do US mail all the way to social media, what does it take for us to get it designed and up and running, so that we ask them to put together a calendar for their committee of everything that's going on in their committee, so that the office knows what marketing needs to be done and when. We have an invitation template. I'm sure all of you have received invitations where some important piece of information has been left off, like the venue or the time or the cost or something like that. And then you have to call or go on the website to try to figure it out. So this is a checklist that they can use for that. These are, if they want signs, ordering signs for the event, this is the timing and how to order signs. And then because of COVID, we have a lot of events that are happening on Zoom. And so we had to come up with a checklist for educational events. So when you have speakers you're engaging, and you have to get the invitations out, and you have to set up the PowerPoint and all of that. This tells you exactly what needs to be done and when, and you just check them off as you go through the program. It's a 2-pager. So basically, we tell our people to plan, stay organized, delegate, and have fun. And this is our website. And I'm going to try to show it to you. I don't know if it'll come up, but can you see the website?
Yes.
Okay, so if you go onto CAI-CV for Coachella Valley.org, and you go to the front of the website and go to resources, and click at the bottom one here, community tools and resources, you'll come up with all the things that I've talked about plus more. So here's the PowerPoint that for our leadership training, we do binder covers for all the committees so they can print them out and put them in their own binders. We have the logos, we have the volunteer form. You can see to join a committee, it's pretty simple, straightforward. It's a fillable form, so they can do that. We have a list of all the committee leaders. That's really important, and I'll show you that later when we get into succession planning. Here's the charters for all the committees, so they have that. Budgets, we'll do the budgets in February. They'll all be right there. The marketing and advertising plan, all the communications information, everything they need to know about meetings, all the meeting dates and times, Zooms. We have Zoom backgrounds for every committee, so they can just go on and pull that up. And we have the sign-in sheets, the note-taking sheets, our calendar. And then for presentations, we have a PowerPoint master template that we can give to anybody who's making a presentation. And we have the program checklist and form I showed you. And then of course, all our internal publications that they might need as a committee member are all right there on our website. Cheryl, I'm going to turn it back to you.
All right. So moving into the succession planning. So for us, once we had the volunteer part sort of established, then it went into the fact that we had some committee chairs who had been the chair for 10 years. And in some cases, that's good because they're doing a great job. And in other cases, maybe it wasn't so good because we needed some new ideas in there. And if you think about it, twofold. If someone's been a chair for 10 years and you have someone in the wings that would like to chair, they're not going to say anything because they feel like they're going to kick that person out. Or vice versa, they're not going to say anything because they don't want to chair for 10 years. So we established this succession plan where it's a rolling 3-year term. And so we established it as you would be a vice chair for 1 year with a chair. The second year, you'd be a chair by yourself. And then the third year, you would take on a vice chair and train that person. And then the fourth year, you would roll off. And you could stay on the committee or you could go do something else. And so for us, the first step was that we really had to explain this new process and explain why we were doing it and how it would work, because there were some people who felt like they were getting kicked out of their chairship. So we listed out the purpose of why we were doing it. And so knowing that every 3 years or every kind of 2 years as you're rolling, you need to be looking for a new leader, right? So it helps with recruitment, it helps with volunteer placement, knowing that there are people out there who truly volunteer because they want to become leaders. And so now they know they have an avenue for doing that. It encourages that development of new leaders. We've had situations, I'm sure you have as well. If you don't have a chair or you know a chair is rolling off and you're looking for a new leader and there are crickets at the table, but then all of a sudden someone like, well, okay, I'll do it, or I didn't know if I could do it. And then they end up being an amazing leader, or you help groom them into that leader. So it helps with that process too. It does lead to healthier committees because you have new ideas coming in. You're not kind of stuck in the, in the sacred cow, I think, Cal. You're not stuck in that mindset, and it helps for continuous growth. And it also provides for a graceful exit, right? So that poor person who'd been doing it for 10 years, part of the problem was that they didn't feel like there was anyone else who would take the reins. And so they just kept doing it. So this allows them to leave gracefully and not feel like they were quitting. So then we explain the structure of it. So like, there were some committee members who had just started their chairship, and so we didn't want to kick them out right away. There were some committees who the committee overall was brand new, and so we didn't want to then just take a chair and have to make them chair by themselves. Everyone was sort of used to this co-chair arrangement. And so over the course of about 3 years, we're working slowly into that timeline. So if you're considering something like that, I would encourage you to sort of set the stage for your chairs to move into a rolling arrangement, right? So then we gave them kind of a few options. So like, if you're both a chair and you've been a chair for less than a couple of years, then you can do it this way. If you've been the chair for 10 years, you can do it this way. And we asked each committee to kind of come up with what their plan was going to be to work into this structure. And then this was just sort of the chart of who was doing what and how long they had been doing it. And then we did have a couple of committees that really weren't going to fit this structure, and we explained why those committees were sort of exempt. So we rolled that out. We had individual conversations with each of the chairs so that they would understand, and it's going very well. We have really new ideas coming in. We have people stepping up that you wouldn't necessarily have thought would have stepped up, and the committees are much healthier because of it. Alongside of that, with succession planning, we started a volunteer recommitment yearly. Maybe some other chapters have been doing this all along. We didn't. You join a committee, you're just kind of on it until you quit. Or you get, rarely does someone get kicked off, but there's some apathy, right? They're like, you didn't want to stay on it, but you've been on it for 3 years. You don't know how to quit. So we started every year having our volunteers fill out a recommitment form, and they have to reread the committee description, agree to that, agree to the requirements, the time commitments, the attendance commitments. They look at our chapter policies again every year, check that off, sign up again. And so what this does is, again, it's a graceful way for them to exit, right? If they're kind of done and they don't feel like doing it anymore, it's easier to not recommit than it is to quit a committee. And so it's helped our committees be more healthy and vibrant because the people who don't feel like being there are no longer there. And it gives the volunteers to evaluate that commitment each year. So maybe this year just isn't the year. Maybe someone's got a lot of stuff going on at home and they love this committee, but maybe this year just isn't the year, so they can step away for a year and then they can come back. And it also gives a really nice path for the difficult conversations, right? So if someone isn't performing or they're not attending or they're not doing something, we can point very easily to, hey, 4 months ago, you signed this recommitment. This is what you agreed to. This isn't really happening. What's going on? Maybe this isn't the year for you. And why don't you come back next year? Versus, those conversations were more difficult before because there was nothing really to point to help them understand what they weren't doing right. Cal, what do you have for your succession planning?
We put in place, again, to address cronyism and also to protect the chapter for anything that could go wrong. Of course, we hadn't anticipated COVID, but we started looking at a 3-year succession plan. So it came out of our strategic planning. And the idea is that we start looking for new board members 3 years in advance, so that at any time we have people who are trained, ready, and committed to the chapter and who believe in the direction the chapter is going, who are ready to go on the board. And previously we had, somebody would go off the board and we'd have, my neighbor will join CAI and they'll go on the board and they're willing to serve. And that's how you get cronyism. So our 3-year succession plan starts, I'm going to start you at the bottom with the committee members. So you become a member of a committee, you must serve on a committee in order to run for the board eventually. And you must serve as a chair or a co-chair in a leadership capacity for a full year in order to run for the board. And what that does is it creates our committee structure is now not just planning events and programs, it's a leadership training program to eventually cull out the top people to be able to go on to the board of directors. So we, in order to memorialize that, we actually put it into our bylaws. So in our bylaws, we require that you must have served as a member of a committee and as a co-chair or chair for at least 1 year before running for the board. You must have attended most 70% of the chapter's events. And those two things alone have worked wonderfully in terms of making sure that the people who get on the board are really committed. When I've served on boards where the board members aren't even involved in the chapter, and we've had that here. So, and then I think all of us have the requirement that we have all membership classes on the board. But when we started asking the committees to have all membership classes on each committee, it's made it much easier because we have more people to choose from and to put into that leadership program. So that's our succession plan, and it seems to be working pretty well. Cheryl,
I would add that we do something very similar with our board, and we used to have maybe 15, 18 people running for the board, and our nominating committee would create a slate, and many of the people running weren't qualified. And we changed that to, you must meet these qualifications to even run. So our pool is a little smaller on the ballot, but those people that are on there are all qualified. They've served as chair, they've served in a leadership role, they've been a member for X number of years, they've attended X number of events, and that's helped us as well. We do that same thing. It's not in our bylaws, it's in our nominating committee charter, but I think we need to do that.
Awesome. Cheryl, Cal, that was amazing. Lots of good stuff. I have a question for you before we open it up to questions for others. How long did it take to put all of this stuff into place? Like, how long has this journey been for you?
For us, I would say it's been about 3 years when we first started the volunteer commission. And I will say that the results for us have been really amazing. So we have really an influx of volunteers. Like at first, the concern was we're going to make them go through all these hoops and people aren't going to want to volunteer. And actually, it's the opposite, because it's sort of, they know they only have these 2 opportunities per year to do it. So it's not like, oh, I'll get to that tomorrow, I'll get to that next month. It's now or never if I want to be part of it. It's becoming a little bit like an I wouldn't say exclusive club because that sounds negative, but in the positive way, where I know I want to do it. So we have more volunteers. There's a consistent evaluation for future leaders and people stepping up. So we are growing that leadership base. There are more people wanting to go to the board because they have experienced that leadership role for us. And it just kind of tests the commitment as we go, right? So it's not just, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll show up. And then maybe I don't come to the next meeting, or it is just instilled this level of commitment and engagement in our committees that we're really happy with. And it's been about a 3-year process.
I think also setting the expectation for what's expected gives it a little more clarity for those people volunteering, because I'm sure they've seen, oh, Joe's been on the golf committee for 10 years and I don't want that, like you said. Cal, same question for you. How long have you been working towards where you are now?
So it's sort of a living program. It keeps changing every year. We edit it in order to, take advantage of the wins that we've had, and also the direction, make sure we're heading in the right direction. But it really helped us to go through strategic planning with an outside consultant. And the trick to strategic planning is for somebody on the board or the ED to give the outside consultant, this is where we want to end up, or somewhere close to that. And so that the strategic planning ends up with goals and objectives that get you there. Make sure you include succession planning, that's really important to you. It took us about 2 to 3 years to get it all implemented, but it really just keeps changing every year. So we actually made strategic planning a standing committee of the board, and they meet every month just before the board meeting. And that was mainly to address COVID, but we decided to make it permanent. So they address anything that comes up where we need to change direction slightly.
Okay, great. Thank you. The reason I asked that question is because this is a lot. And for those that don't have any kind of structure in place, I want you all to realize you need to start small and build up to this. And this is, something that's ever changing, like Cal said, for whatever works for your chapter. So with that, I want to open it up to everybody in the room. If you have any questions, or you have some additional resources to share, or something that's worked well in your chapter.
I will just, while that's opening, Crystal, as I started out, this whole process started with just centralizing volunteer placement. That's all it was. It was going to be like a really small solution to one problem that we had 3 years ago, and it has turned into this. So you can take a tiny step and make improvement and grow from there, like Cal said.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add one more thing, because Cheryl had talked about people staying in leadership positions for a long period of time. We try to rotate our leadership positions every year. So if you served as a co-chair, you are expected to be chair the next year. And it doesn't always happen that way, and the committees sometimes change it up. We can't leave it up to them, but we keep re-emphasizing the fact that serving in a leadership committee on a leadership position on a committee is part of our succession planning for the board. So we want to filter as many people through that program as we can.
Awesome.
Oh, and sorry, we're gonna never get to questions. One other thing I forgot to mention too, but it seems to be a pretty common issue across chapters, is a chair picking their next chair, right? And it's their friend, or it's maybe their yes person, so that they're still kind of in charge, but they, and so the way that we resolve that problem is when we are finding a new vice chair to kind of go through that 3-year rotation. We ask the whole committee who might be interested, and then the committee votes on which of those people they think would be the best next vice chair. So, the committee knows who has been an active person, who would be a good leader, who do they want to serve under as a future chair, and we let the committee decide that next person. And that's helped from the kind of picking the wrong people to be in that leadership role.
I like that idea. I've never even thought of that for the committees. That's great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute or raise your hand, whatever you're most comfortable with.
Crystal, I just have a comment. Being a member of the Coachella Valley chapter and coming in around the same time Cal did about 7 years ago, I wasn't kind of privy to the prior history of the chapter, although I'd heard stuff, but after getting involved, I was there for the strategic planning, and I was committee chair at the time and was invited to participate in that. And I would say for the other people on the call, that's a pretty empowering thing for someone who's just you think, oh, I'm just a committee chair. Yeah, I'm involved with the chapter, but to have a role in shaping the chapter and the direction is really something that's great to spread out, not just with the board, but to involve other members in the chapter outside of the traditional leadership positions.
Yeah, that definitely plays into the succession planning, right? And that it's saying we want you to be invested and to continue in your leadership roles. And when we've done strategic planning with chapters, some chapters include just the board, which is great and fine. But if you want to take it to the next level, I would encourage you to do what Clint had suggested. Thank you, Clint.
I do have one question.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Cal, you mentioned that you have all membership types and all committees. I just want to know how you get the volunteer leaders to join committees.
It's tough, but if we ask them, they'll do it. So we explain to them the reason we want them on a committee is because we want their input, and we don't have them on every committee all the time. But it also helps us. They're the hardest group to get to serve on the board because there's so much turnover. So it gives us, there's always a few in the lineup so that they can go onto the board.
Have you found that to be easier with having virtual meetings, or does it matter?
I don't know that we know the answer to that yet. I would say probably it's easier, although we've found that homeowner leaders, when we have events, they want to show up in person. Okay. Most of them here in the Coachella Valley, most of our homeowner leaders are retired. And so they like the social interaction of serving on a committee.
So it's also partly knowing your membership. So you have a large retirement community out there in the Coachella Valley. And if you're in a more urban setting, that might be a little bit different. So I would keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, then we will make sure that we post all this information in the online toolkit. Cheryl, Cal, again, great job. Really good information. I'm getting little notes in the chat telling me that this was helpful. So I hope you found it valuable. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Cal and Cheryl would be willing to chat with you of how they took their first steps, etc. So thank you again for joining us, and we will talk to you all very soon.
If you have any questions, please contact a member of the Chapter Relations team or email chapterlearning@caionline.org.